Hey there everyone, welcome back to another episode of A Case of Distrust. In order to find Green's killer, I had to prove that someone had the means, the motivation, and the opportunity for murder. Anyone connected to the case was a possible suspect. So, left here talking to Mrs. Green. Let's look at our notes real quick. Let's see, I'd found that Tiny Paul drunk in his apartment. I could go back there if I wanted to grill him further. Alice Smith, one of the lounge's backing singers, had told me about Paul's apartment and had given me the address. Because of her proximity to Green's death, she was also a suspect in the murder. Stable was wandering the grounds of his Tanforan racetrack. I might ask him further questions there. Ray Carter had told me about the Tanforan racetrack. He was a bassist for the Tin Spoons jazz band and thus a suspect himself. Fanny Green was more awake than she had last night. She was still in her home if I wanted to pay her another visit. So, what we know... We are finally putting all the pieces together. What we know is we found a gun at Stable's racetrack. Although, honestly, I don't know. We also encountered Stable there. It's possible, it's possible that he ditched it, but I don't know. That seems too easy. Meanwhile, Paul's apartment, he had an empty holster. So I don't think it's a huge stretch to think that the gun at the racetrack was Paul's missing gun. The funny thing is, Paul said, what did he say? Statements. Let's look at statements. That's probably more where we're going to be going here. Paul said, that he met with Stable before and after. So, he actually met with Stable at the racetrack. And they said that I'm assuming that they went and talked about the fact that Stable found a gun. But for some reason, Stable didn't give him his gun back. Well, maybe they didn't say it was a gun because Paul didn't admit that his gun was missing. I don't know. Let's see. Okay. So Connor Green got a threatening letter, suspected Redstone Stable, which, if you know mysteries stories at all, means that he's probably not he's too obvious, right? So Mrs. Green, she was having an affair with Tiny Paul, and she had access to Paul's gun. We know that she wasn't Ella Smith said that she wasn't around at midnight, and we also know there's a secret back room to the speakeasy, so she had a way out. She had access to a gun. It's possible that having an affair with Paul was her motive. Redstone Stable, he didn't have an alibi, and he had access to the gun, obviously. He could have had a motive, but I still think that's too obvious. So Tiny Paul, who was actually getting swindled by him, had a gun, but, everybody said that he was there playing cards. Even Ray Carter, who doesn't like him. So, I don't think it's him. Ray Carter won a lot of poker money. He had, for one thing, he's got an alibi because he was also playing cards the whole time. I will bet you anything. Well, we should go and check to see if Tiny Paul checks that out, but I don't think that it's him because he also doesn't have a motive about Green. Although maybe we should have asked him more about Green. And then Ella Smith, she was actually there the whole time, so she has an alibi. So assuming that the alibis check out, the only people that don't have an alibi are Mrs. Green and Redstone Stable. Yeah. Okay, so let's go and double check those alibis. Let's double check with Mrs. Green. Let's ask her about the back room. I don't remember what she had to say about that. 10 Spoon has a back exit. She said she doesn't know about that. You know what's funny about that? So I'm still trying to figure out how the game figures out what's important and what's not. So Ray Carter, we asked him about a back exit, and it says knows nothing about a back exit. We go and we ask Mrs. Green about the same thing, and it doesn't add that. It's interesting to see. I mean, I wonder, I hope they're not making notes to tell you who's lying and who's not. I mean, I'm wondering, like, the statements. Like, any of these could be a lie, right? I'm hoping the evidence area is, this is stuff we've actually seen. This is stuff that we actually know for sure. Or, yeah, this is stuff we know for sure. This is just things that people have said. So this is all suspect. Let's go to the barbershop. Ask him about Green and ask him about, I mean, like I said, I don't think, let's not. I don't think it was him. He, aside from everything else, he's got an alibi. But I have some stuff I do want to ask you about. Tiny Paul said that he was playing cards all night. He didn't send a letter. His gun is missing. Did you notice anybody messing with his gun? Nope. He did not. Someone close could snag his gun? Nope, he didn't know about that either. Paul's an admirer of Mrs. Green. Nope, he doesn't know anything about that either. Huh. Okay, let's see. Green died at midnight. We were all in the billiards room at that time. What about the fact that... no, actually, we know that he... not contradicting that. Okay, so he... Yeah, I don't think he knows much else. So, let's go talk to Ella Smith. The more we look at this, the more I'm thinking that Mrs. Green is the obvious, or she's the suspect, right? Because the only two people that don't have alibis, one of them's obvious and one of them's not. So, let's see what we can do about poking holes in her story. Ask about the notes. Okay. So Ella told us that Fanny wasn't in the pool hall, right? She also told us... Oh, what is the back exit? I have a source that says there's a back exit at the 10 Spoon. What do you know about that? She nodded. Yeah, we do have one. It's behind the women's changing rooms. I can't imagine any of the men know about it. They would never be able to get back there without causing a riot, but the girls use it whenever they need to slip away from the customers who are too eager. So there's a back exit and the 10 Spoon that only women know about? That's right. Oh, okay. Well. And Mrs. Green said she didn't know anything about it. So let's see. What about... I've got a notion that Tiny Paul and Fanny Green have been having an affair. She winced. Miss Smith, do you know about this? Yes, she said in a voice that was barely audible. That's why I can't allow anybody to discover what Paul and I have been doing. If word gets back to Fanny, she'll hang me out to dry, else she'll have to. Please don't let this get any farther, she concluded. Okay. Okay. So, I have to prove means. Oh, yeah, I should ask her about the gun. I mean, I'm assuming that it's not as straightforward as, oh yeah, I saw her grab the gun. But I'm not sure if we've got enough evidence. Tiny Paul. His gun's missing. She doesn't have anything to say about that. And someone close could snag the gun. She doesn't know about that either. Let's see. No. Okay, so I don't know. I don't know if we have enough evidence. Let's go back to the coffee house. I always said that if you get stuck, he could give me a tip. I don't feel like I'm stuck. I just don't know if we've got enough evidence. Maybe he'll be able to tell us if we do or not. You hear the latest about Shoeless Joe? He asked. Gave an interview in Milwaukee. Says he's innocent. What a racket. Shoeless Joe Jackson was one of baseball's all-time greatest players, but in 1919 he was part of the White Sox team that had been accused of intentionally losing the World Series, fixing the match for East Coast gamblers like Arnold Rothstein. The scandal's magnitude was so enormous that every American was gripped by the reports of the newspapers, whether they were fans of baseball or not. Although the team had been acquitted in a public trial, business insiders still claimed the fix had been real. 8 White Sox players, including Shoeless Joe, were forever banned in the league. Throughout the ordeal, Joe maintained his innocence and was suing his former team for back pay that he hadn't received after being banned. Most baseball fans preferred to think of themselves as insiders, and since insiders thought Shoeless Joe was guilty, so did they. Lawsuit starts in a few days, the driver rambled on. Can't believe the guile on this one. Thinks he can ruin a sport, profit from it, and then sue the league. Why, I hope one of my lawyers socks him in the jaw. One of the lawyers. His rambling continued as we rolled into a stop. I left the taxi cab and wasn't sure if the driver had even noticed. I've met people like that. Okay. Talk. Okay, let's say... Okay, I have to prove means. Green was killed with an automatic pistol. Right, you caught me up on that. So you need to find that weapon and place it in someone's hand. You won't have an easy go of it, though. Be careful, these mob guys can be dangerous. Opportunity. Green was killed outside the Tin Spoon. Right, you caught me up on that. Okay, how about... Okay, someone's close could snag his gun. I asked Frankie about something in my notes, but his response got me no closer to solving the case. Paul's gun is missing. Nope. He's got nothing to say about that either. Tin Spoon has a back exit. Nope. Wow, for somebody who's supposed to give you hints, he doesn't give many hints. She was having an affair. She had access to Paul's gun. Wow, I hadn't actually noticed that it specifically said she had access to his gun. That must be a new one. Okay, so She was having an affair with Paul. She had access to Paul's gun. And 10 Spoon has back exit. Okay. So for all of that, Frankie's not giving me anything at all. Thanks, Frankie. Oh, well, let's see. Maybe we've got enough to accuse her, maybe we don't. Let's go to the greenhouse. Let's talk to the taxi cab driver. I love this job, he told me as we turned the corner of Polk and Bush Streets. He used to work in a plant across the bay with my two brothers. You know how boring that gets? Bang this, push that, what a life. We weren't made for factories. Sure, they get paid more, they're part of a union, they have good pensions, but they can't beat this, he said, revving the engine. Such freedom. We spoke about his love of the open road until we reached my destination. Vroom, vroom. Okay, let's see. So, you're not going to like this, but I have some tough questions for you. 10 Spoon had a back exit. There's a back door that only female performers can use. Is that right, Mrs. Green? Oh yes, I think you're right. I stepped out at some point during the night. Sometimes a girl needs fresh air, but I could not have been gone long. I was in the billiards room most of the night, so she had no alibi. Uh-oh. Oh, wait, we already did that. She said that she didn't know anything about it before. So she's been lying. No. Let's see. We were having an affair, which could give her enough motivation to kill her husband. Let's accuse her. Thought of accusing Fanny Green of killing her husband. Accusing someone of murder was certain to agitate them. I knew it was not something I could do lightly. They would refuse any further casual chats. But if I was confident that she had killed Connor, including knowing the means, the motivation, and the opportunity for her to do so, then I knew I should accuse her. I do. Fanny Green, you killed your husband. A stillness permeated the room as I spoke the words. I can prove means, motivation, and opportunity for murder. Fanny's face contorted, like I'd first seen her in the Southern Coffee. She barked at me. What are you saying? I love my husband dearly. How dare you accuse me of murder? She huffed her way out of breath, which gave me a chance to prove it. Motive. You were having an affair. That you were close enough to Paul to take his gun. She screamed until she was blue, but I didn't believe her denials. An affair could give her enough motivation to kill her husband, and access to Paul's gun would give her the means. I had proven Mrs. Green's motive. She was having an affair with Tiny Paul, which could have made her want to kill her husband. However, I had to prove any means or opportunity. So means is the gun, right? She had access to Paul's gun. Paul's gun is missing, and he said only someone close to him could grab it. What are you implying, Miss Malone? I again brought up the affair with Tiny Paul. She screamed until she was blue, but I didn't believe her denials. An affair could give her enough motivation to kill her husband. I had shown that Mrs. Green that Paul's missing gun could have been the murder weapon. Considering her affair with Tiny Paul, she would have also had the perfect motive to kill her husband. I just needed to prove that she had the opportunity for murder. And that would be the back exit. You admitted to being gone for parts of the night that could have given you the perfect opportunity to murder your husband. She huffed at that for a while, but it stuck. It was clear now. I put it to her. Mrs. Green, you're the only one of my suspects with a provable motive, means, and opportunity for murder. You knew you had to leave your husband. You loved Paul, and as often happens, you began hating Connor because of it. So you tailed him to see what he was scheming. Maybe you could sink his plans and have the mob do your dirty work. Then you met me. You learned your husband had been receiving death threats, and you knew it was then you knew your play. If he died, police would blame it on the underground. So last night after your singing, you called Connor to the tin spoon. You snuck out of the billiards room the back way, taking Paul's gun with you. That's when you shot him. She looked at me hotly, about to burst, but then she sighed and stared down at her feet. She began to cry. However many opiates were running through her blood, they had lost all their effectiveness. I put an arm around her as she wept. Connor had made my life miserable, she said between sobs. Look around this dump. That's how ruined I am inside. Oh, that manipulative little sneak. You're right, I hated him. That's why I started going with Paul in the first place. She balked at my surprise. Oh no, I never loved Paul. I wanted him to kill Connor. But after learning about Ella, she trailed off. Oh, how could I convince Paul if he loved someone else? I had no way of leaving Connor. I slumped back to misery. What about divorce? I offered. Divorce? She screamed the word back at me. Connor would never give me that. They say we're emancipated, sure, but we still need our husband's permission to leave his home. I was the only good thing that bum owned, and he would never let go of me. That's why I was chasing him yesterday, she continued. If I could prove infidelity, I'd demand a split in court. I got all excited when I saw you standing in your doorway. She started breathing more heavily. I had to follow you to make sure, but I was certain I had my out. Only it happened you were above board. You're a detective, and I was still trapped. After we met, I came home to find Connor waiting for me. He said we'd be leaving for St. Louis. She took a gasp of air and continued. Leaving everything I'd known for a place I'd never been with a man I didn't love. I couldn't do it, and I told him so, and then he struck me. She wiped away her tears, and with them came her blush and thick camouflage powder. A liver-covered spot the size of a silver dollar showed on her cheekbone. He just marched out the door. She continued through her waterworks, and I didn't know what to do. And then you thought of Paul's gun, I concluded for her. That's right. Maybe Paul wouldn't kill Connor, but I knew he carried a cannon, and I knew I could get to it. So you took Paul's gun and killed your husband, I said. No, she said. No, that was my plan, but she broke off her sentence with a sniff and started another. I went to Paul's apartment late in the afternoon and grabbed his pistol. Then I came back here. I sat in this chair, petting the gun in my hand, wondering if I would do it, and that's when he came in. Your husband? No, a much kinder man. Oh, he listened so well, I even told him about... She paused, about my plan. This other man, you knew him? I asked. She nodded a yes. He said he understood everything. He said he could frame the murder. He said not to worry. He took the gun. Oh, she cried, but I couldn't let him go through with it. You see, that's why I left the tin spoon last night, to stop him. That was when I met Redstone Stable. Oh my gosh. So I was wrong. It was him all along. In response to my raised eyebrow, she explained, I only met him last night. I had no idea that he had anything to do with my husband until this morning. The police told me at the station that Connor had suspected Stable. But I knew instantly that he was a terrible man. A woman's intuition never lies. Stable talks like a snake, and he has the looks to match. So you were both searching for the same person last night? I asked. Yes, but he wasn't around, I think. She sobbed. I'm tired of this, I said. Who is it? It's the owner of that hat, she said, pointing to it. It's Franklin. Huh. Frankie, I asked. She continued slowly. Yes, he took the gun from me yesterday. I was too dazed to argue. Nice story, I said, but you still fit the bill just fine. Phyllis, even if I had the gun, how could I know where to plant it? I only met Stable last night, and I knew nothing about him. Franklin had known about the case from you, isn't that right? You're only telling this to me now? I asked. What's the big deal stringing me along? Phyllis, she said hotly. Franklin did this for me. He saved me. If that awful man Stable has to take the fall for Franklin so that Franklin can stay free, well, she trailed off. I shook my head and looked at her. If she was telling the truth, Stable could confirm it. And if she were lying, I thought, what if she ran? Well, she could get stopped soon enough. Good looks can be a curse, and it would be a cinch to snatch her. Besides, with all those opiates in her, she would have difficult standing, let alone running anywhere. I gazed at her, and she understood what I was thinking. I'll be right back here. I'll be right here if you come back. I wonder why she would fabricate such a story if she knew that she was stuck. Then I thought, what if it was the truth? I had to speak with Frankie. Wow. Okay, that was a turn. But let's go talk to... No, I was going to talk to Redstone Stable. Frankie had been infatuated with Mrs. Green, and he could have gone to visit her. I forgot about that. He did mention that. He could have taken the gun. He knew about Stable from when I told him about the case, and he could have planted it as racetrack. Those facts might be explained away innocently, but it was the combination. Frankie was the only person with the means, motivation, and opportunity to kill Green. Well, I mean, we just established that Mrs. Green was, although I guess maybe she didn't know. Redstone Stable. Frankie. He gave me his generous smile that I knew well. I pulled out the hat and showed it to him. That hat belongs to you, I said in a flat tone. Frankie gaped. If I'd had any doubts, that look erased him. You killed Connor Green. Frankie's next sentence was short, delivered after a sigh. I always remembered it. I can't lie to you, he said. My jaw began to quiver, either from sadness or anger. It was hard to be sure. Why get wrapped up in this? I asked. Does that dimpled girl mean so much to you? Frankie shook his head. That'll be a long story. This'll be a long story. I let him talk. As heated as I was, I had to know why Frankie would kill my client. It's that sheet, he mentioned. He motioned to the newspaper flopped on the bar. 1887, the St. Louis Browns. My last good season. My career was ruined by Thomas Kenny. Kenny was a mob boss, you see. He ran St. Louis politics above ground and below. He was cruel to everyone, sure, but he had a special hate for blacks. In 1887, that hate came to baseball. One practice, a local kid comes up to the fence and he calls Murray, our left fielder, over to him. He tells Murray that every Browns player has to sign onto a letter, which says that we refuse to play against the Brooklyn Cubans, a colored team. The kid then runs off. We all know who the orders had really come from. If I refused to ink it, Kenny's gang would run me out of baseball or worse. But some of the best teammates and people I'd known over the years had been black. I was torn up about it. In the end, I guess I was just a kid who wanted to play. I didn't want the trouble. I signed with the others. It was the worst decision I ever made, Malone. It's haunted me since. I started on the hooch and I never played the same again. I kept listening as he continued. I became the booze hound of St. Louis and the dumps at every bar in town. But this louse had tales about old Thomas Kenny and a way of telling them that kept the others interested. Maybe my rumors worked. Kenny lost the next election. Just a few weeks later, he died of tuberculosis. Kenny's partner, Tom Egan, blamed me for all of it. I knew I had to blow St. Louis, so I went to Philly, my hometown. I ran into my old pitching partner, Matt Kilroy, who had opened a bar. He invited me to run it with him, as long as I stopped drinking myself. Under his eye, I made it. I got sober by working in a speakeasy, if you could believe that. I even married Kilroy's sister and became stepfather to his 2 boys. I was engrossed and continued to listen. Well, by then, Egan had renamed the gang, and Egan's rats had spread east. They came for me one night, and I barely ducked their spray. Lucky a cop was near his beat, or they would have circled around and finished the job. I had a great life in Philly, but I had to give it up. I couldn't put my new family in that danger. I fled out west, where I knew the rats didn't have a foothold. Philly was the second time those bastards ruined my life. I ended for him, and then you discovered that Green was part of Egan's rats. You wouldn't let them ruin you a third time. Frankie laughed. No, Malone. I could have run easy. My life here ain't much. I have nobody here, really. Except you. Sure, I could flee somewhere else, but it's you. Egan's rats won't leave an end loose. If Green had reached St. Louis, they'd have come back and tied you up. I can run from town to town, but I can't make you do that. I was the one who told you to take the case, remember? I had to stop them from hounding you the rest of your life. I stared at him without thought or emotion. He said, I did this for you. Poetic Frankie, I countered, but this only proves that you had no faith in me. Just like Green, who hired me because he thought I wouldn't see through his scheme, or his wife, who was hoping I would gum up the works for the police. You thought I couldn't hold my own. I'm just some flapper playing in a man's world, is that right? Frankie shrugged. I just wanted to protect you. I could protect myself, I told him, and without any murders. He sighed. I suppose I wouldn't blame you for taking me in, he said. No, I won't fight if you want to drag me into the hall. But the police have stopped looking for a killer. If you let me, I'd keep running. It's up to you. Now we gotta arrest him. Wow, that's a tough choice, right? I mean, arresting him is the right thing to do. He did kill the guy. On the other hand, he was a gangster. I don't know. The whole noir thing, just going to philosophize here for a second. The whole idea of pulp noir is that it's a dark gray world where you can't trust anybody. Half of the police are corrupt. And yet the good detectives, they, they're kind of like the one place that people have to turn. The one honest detective that will see the crime through and will make sure that, justice gets its due. So let's do that. Oh, well, that was it. We arrested him. Wow. Okay, that was pretty cool. That was kind of an abrupt end there. And kind of a twist. You go and investigate everybody, and just when you think that you've got all of the pieces put together, turns out it's something completely different. Yeah, that wasn't bad. As far as game goes, yeah, I've read some people describe this as a visual novel, and I kind of agree with that. It doesn't look like there's a lot of branching paths. And I'm not sure if you could get to a point where you couldn't solve the crime, but I don't know. Maybe you could. Anyway, this has been interesting. And yeah, for a nice little short game, if you've actually watched this playthrough, I don't know how much use there is in playing it yourself, but maybe you could go and try it and see if you can find some other things that I missed. But anyway, thank you for watching A Case of Distrust. I don't know what I'll be playing next, but I hope to see you soon. Take care.